Speaking here today is thrilling to me. It's thrilling because my heroine is back there. You can't see her right now, but I know she's there. Eleanor's principles are the same as our green principles. We care about people first, and so did Eleanor. My attachment to Eleanor, though, is really personal. In the 40s, when I was growing up, my older brother was a messenger. He was helping support the family that way. And one of his jobs was to pick up Eleanor Roosevelt's daily column. She wrote 8,000 of them and deliver it to the paper. And we kids were so thrilled at the idea that our brother knew Eleanor Roosevelt. She was a heroine, a goddess to us. So it's thrilling for me to stand here and talk to you with Eleanor looking over my shoulder. Okay. The Comptroller's office, nobody knows much about it, but it's a fabulous office. It's independent. The Comptroller has many, many powers that few of the voters are aware of, and most of them are not, in fact, used very often. For instance, the Comptroller is the administrator of the oil spill fund. Did you know there was in New York State an oil spill fund? It's much on our mind these days. Were you aware of the fact that Greenpoint in Brooklyn has its own oil leak, not spill, but a leak that's the only thing bigger than it now apparently is BP's in the Gulf. Not only do they have a leak, but BP was one of the perpetrators. This leak was discovered in 1978, and here it is 32 years later, and of the 30 million gallons spilled, all of 8 million have been cleaned up. The Comptroller's office administers the remediation bills and the penalties that can be issued should the cleanup not happen. The Comptroller's office has done very little about it, as we know, since only a quarter of the cleanup has happened in 32 years. When I am elected Comptroller, I promise you that oil companies will no longer get a free publicity ride from the Comptroller's office. We will shame them. We will make clear what they are doing. Another power of the Comptroller is the power of audit. The power to audit not just localities, but public authorities. The MTA, a public authority. The MTA, raising fares, waging a huge public relations campaign against unions in order to try and freeze their union contractual raises. Interesting. Hedge fund managers, their contracts are inviolate. Union contracts, well, anytime there's a problem, let's just freeze them. That's the MTA today. The Comptroller's office could be doing something to publish their failings. While they're raising fares, they are also doing a terrible job on capital projects. There's a new report issued that says that the Fulton Street Transit Center is 5 years behind schedule and 90% over budget. The Comptroller's office could be making that public. Shame is a major motivator, and we could shame them into better behavior. Another thing, the legislature has this year, or several weeks ago, passed a doubling of charter schools in New York. The interesting thing about the charter schools and the doubling of it is that there's a whole lot of money to be made in the privatization of it. And would you believe an organization called Reform for Education, or Education Reform Now, has sent out millions of this fancy multicolor brochure encouraging voters to encourage the legislators to pass this doubling of the charter school permission. Guess who Education Reform Now actually is? A coalition of hedge fund managers. Why would hedge fund managers be so interested suddenly in charter schools? It's because it's a public trough that they can feed off of. It's because they can rip us off. And the Comptroller's office now has the power to audit, to at least publicize and stop some of that ripoff. So that's another reason to elect a Comptroller with principles, a Comptroller that puts people first. And several weeks ago, Obama put on the legislative table something called Petra. P-E-T-R-A, a bill that is going to privatize public housing all over the country. This bill will turn the handling of public housing over to private real estate developers who will be permitted to charge market rent plus 10% for apartments in public housing. Not only that, but they will get vouchers from us, the taxpayers, to cover those increased costs. And when those housing projects go bankrupt because they can use them for equity borrowing, they will become the property of developers. It's a horror. But the Comptroller has the power of audit over public authorities, housing authorities. The Comptroller can do something about that. And finally, and very, very importantly, the Comptroller administers the Common Retirement Fund. When I ran for office in 2006, there was $155 billion in that Common Retirement Fund. The Comptroller there, Hevesy, invested a whole lot of it in hedge funds, private equity, where no one knows what happened, but that same Common Retirement Fund has in it $129 billion. So 30 or 40 billion dollars disappeared in the last 4 years. Whose pocket did it go into? We can take a guess at that. So I, as Comptroller, promise you that every decision I made will be made based on principle. And we will have a new Common Retirement Fund plan that is safe, that is secure, and those $125 billion or more, when I become the Comptroller, will be invested in ways in which the public is benefited. Not just will they get their money back and it will be secure, but it will be used for useful purposes and not as the public trough for hedge fund loans. So I urge you to remember that all Greens put people first, and we're looking forward to your electing us.